Hey everybody, welcome to part 3 in a series of videos for Dungeon Saga by Manta Games. Now in this video I'm just going to do a playthrough or a partial playthrough for one of the scenarios for the game. I actually picked the third scenario, which is technically the first scenario because the first two scenarios are training scenarios only. The very first scenario involves only 2 heroes and it teaches you how to do melee combat. And the second scenario is a training scenario, also teaching you how to do ranged combat with the caster and also with the elf. Once you know the basic understanding for the game, you're probably going to never play those adventures again. So we're playing the very first adventure. Now remember, when we set up every one of these campaigns, the Overlord is the only one who gets to look at the campaign book, and we're only going to set up each one of the dungeons as far as the heroes can see to as far as they can go for doors. And then we're going to tell them their objective in this scenario, pretty much like all the scenarios in the Necromancer campaign. Their objective is to find the final door and get out before the timer runs out. Now the timer is going to be based on a certain amount of cards that are going to be given to the Overlord at the start of the game. And we look in the quest log again, it's going to tell us exactly how many Overlord cards we're going to start with. We're going to start with 12. So we know the heroes have 13 turns, because remember, as soon as the Overlord cannot draw a card, that's the end of the adventure. And we also know that we're going to get 3 actions per turn. We know that we're going to have all 4 of our heroes, and one of our heroes is going to start with some extra supplies, pretty much the wizard in this scenario. He's going to start with 3 level 1 crystals. He's also going to start with 5 spells. 3 of them are minor spells, 2 of them are major spells. Remember, the difference between those is major spells can be cast every other round. Minor spells can be cast every round, of course, unless you use crystals to kind of modify those rules. Remember, the wizard is also able to either cast 2 minors or 1 major on his turn, at least until he levels up and starts getting more powers in the later scenarios where he gets the ability to start casting more spells than the basic spells he gets at that point. So the only thing we need to do is we need to remember that we take the basic Overlord cards that come with the game, plus the Overlord cards that come with every specific scenario. Now the basic game comes with 1 scenario, the Necromancer scenario only. And remember, we can tell the Necromancer cards because they're going to have the purple triangle in the upper corner, whereas opposed to the basic adventure or Overlord cards always have the yellow arrow in the corner. So we need to take all these cards and we need to shuffle them up, get a good shuffle, and then we're going to draw a certain amount of cards based on the scenario. Now this scenario says that we do get 12 cards, so we're going to just shuffle these up really quick, and then we're going to draw 12 cards, and the cards that we don't draw are going to be removed from the game and we're never going to have access to them. So it does add to the replay, add to the variety, and add to the strategy that the Overlord needs to take, because they don't know exactly which 12 cards they're going to get. They may get really good cards that are going to help them a lot, or they may get cards that aren't going to help them as much. They may get interrupts, they may not get interrupts, but again, we're not going to know what cards we're going to get. So we have our basic 12 cards, again, not looking at them. Overlord is going to draw 3 of those to form their starting hand. We're going to hope we get at least 1 interrupt, and if we don't, we're going to know we're not going to get any actions, and now we got to start the adventure, starting with the heroes. You get to activate the heroes in any order they want. Remember, the basic thing for all the heroes is they get to do 1 movement action, then they get to take 1 action, unless they have a potion or something like that. That's going to change up the rules. Now before we go on, I just want to emphasize again, before we forget, that the heroes are never allowed to look at the quest book, so the heroes never know the exact layout of the dungeon. They don't know that there's an extra room over here. They don't know that this isn't quite the exit, so they don't know how far they need to go, because this is a race against time. The heroes are trying to escape the dungeon before the Overlord can go through their entire deck of cards, forcing a victory due to a timeout for the Overlord player. So again, the heroes never get to look at the campaign or the quest book, so we need to get rid of this so the players don't get to see it. We need to hide it. And just the only thing we need to remember as Overlord is that we get 3 activations every one of our turns, plus we get to play 1 card. And of course, the thing that breaks our rules, any cards that break the rules, such as interrupts. And also we need to remember as the Overlord that we can only play an interrupt card after the first hero's moved or before the last hero's moved. So we basically only get 3 chances to use an interrupt card. And we can't interrupt before the first hero, and we can't interrupt after the last hero. So if we do have an interrupt card in our hand, and we don't, I'm just going to play these cards out for you so you can see exactly what we're dealing with our actions on this turn. Again, these cards, like the quest book, are never shown to the players. I'm just showing you this for this overview gameplay video. But these are the 3 cards I have as the Overlord, so I don't have any interrupts. But if I did, I have to wait for the first hero to do their complete action, and then I get the opportunity to play an interrupt if I want to. Then I have opportunities to play interrupts all the way up until the last hero decides to activate. Once that's done, I cannot play interrupts anymore, and then I get to start my official turn. So that's a quick overview of everything. I just want to remind everybody that these are not the dice that come with the game. I no longer have the dice that come with the game. They're the mini dice. I'm not a fan of mini dice. So I tossed them a long time ago, so I've replaced the game with the dice that you see right here. These are not the dice that come in the box. These are actually from Turn 1 Gaming Supplies. They're part of their 8-bit series where they have some dice based on old classic 8-bit games such as Mario, classic hearts we remember from Zelda and everything like that. So again, I just want to emphasize these are not the dice that come in the game. This is everything that comes with the basic box, but if you buy the basic box, don't expect these dice, expect the little micro dice that come in the game box. So let's go ahead and start the play. We get to, as the heroes, we get to decide which one of the heroes we want to activate first. Once the heroes decide to activate, remember they get a move action, and then they get to perform one of their actions, which is basically going to be a combat. But we need to watch our positioning, we need to watch how we move everything around, and we want to make sure we don't leave a golden opportunity for the Overlord to come up behind us and slay the wizard, our basic wet paper towel, who's the easiest one to defeat for the Overlord to kill and try to win the scenario. So the first thing we're going to do as our heroes is we're going to decide that we're going to activate the Elven Ranger first. Now we have a movement of 8. Now remember, diagonal movements are allowed as long as we can access one of the squares. So since this square is accessible and this square is accessible, that does mean I can do a diagonal movement into this square right here. And also one more minor segue here. I want to let you know that I don't use the plastic clips to keep the board together, for the simple fact that while these plastic clips were a decent idea, they were designed to be a little bit too tight. So if you're actually using them clipped together, these boards, you're going to start doing some damage to these boards extremely quickly. So these may shuffle around a little bit. That's only because I don't use these clips, because they quickly damage these tiles, and that's not something I was really a fan of doing, especially on the game I own. I don't like damaging my games any quicker than I have to. So we're going to start with the elf. We have a movement of 8. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then remember, we got to remember our facing and our threat facing. So we're going to land on top of this bone pile, which makes sure this bone pile cannot be resurrected by the Overlord, so we don't have to worry about that. And we've done our movement. Now we get to an action. We're going to shoot at this skeleton right here. Now this is a very basic skeleton warrior, which has 2 combat dice and it has 2 armor. We have long range on our bow and arrow, so we're going to check our range, but we know that he's pretty much in range, so that's pretty much an easy one for us. We're going to shoot at that. We have 4 combat dice since we're doing a range attack. So our heroes are going to roll the heart dice. Our skeletons are going to roll the black evil dice, and they get 2 combat dice. We get 4 dice. We're going to roll our dice, and the bad guys are going to roll their dice, and then we're going to line up our dice and see if we manage to score any hits. First thing we need to do is we need to remove any dice that don't bypass the armor. So 2 does not bypass the armor of the skeleton, so we get rid of that die. So we're going to line up a 5 and a 5, a 3 and a 4, and then a 3. So the 5 blocks are 5, the 4 blocks are 3, so we're end up only getting 1 hit versus a skeleton. So if we check on the list right here, we're going to see that 1 hit has no effect, so we've done absolutely nothing to the skeleton. That's the end of the elves activation. Now the heroes need to decide who they want to activate next. We're going to decide that we're going to activate Danor, the wizard. He does have a movement of 7. We're going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, putting us back in the corner, hoping the elf will protect our wizard just a little bit. Now that we're over here, we're going to decide that we're going to cast one of our minor spells. We're going to cast Flame Bolt, but we're going to power it up using one of our crystals. Now remember, we get to do 2 minor spells or 1 major spell. We're casting a minor spell, which means it does turn 90 degrees, not 180. And we're powering it up with one of our energy crystals, meaning that it's going from a 2 power attack all the way up to a 3 power attack. So we get to roll 3 dice versus the skeleton who gets to roll 2 combat dice. We get to see if we're going to do any damage. We're going to get a much better roll this time. So remember, we got to make sure we beat the armor of 2. All of our dice beat that, so let's hope the skeleton rolls a little bit worse this time. So now we're going to line up our dice. 6 beats a 2, 5 beats a 1, 3 beats a 0, which is what we consider any dice that are missing. So we now have 3 hits versus the skeleton. We check for 3 hits. We see that the skeleton is destroyed. And we're going to put him off to the side because that is still part of the Overlord's backup of skeletons that he can resurrect. Because remember, if we read the quest, as the Overlord, we know that we have 4 skeleton warriors as backup and we have 2 archers as backup, which is basically everything you're seeing out right here. So as soon as these guys die, they're going to go back into our backup supply, the people or bad guys we can bring back into the game. So we spent 1 crystal. We've cast 1 minor spell. That does mean that we can cast 1 more minor spell. Our second minor spell we're going to cast is we're going to cast Crystallize, and hopefully we can at least get this crystal back, or maybe we're going to get a nice upgrade. We're going to roll 2, which means we're basically going to get that crystal back. We're back up to 3 crystals. We have cast our 2 minor spells. We are done with the wizard. Now it's up to our dwarf or barbarian to decide exactly what they want to do. The next hero we're going to activate is we're going to activate the dwarf. Now the dwarf, he has a movement of 6. So we're going to take him, we're going to move 1, 2, 3, and we're going to move diagonal. Remember, diagonal is allowed as long as one of those squares is also accessible. So we've gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Now we're going to leave our back against the wall. That blocks off all of our threat hexes, so we don't have to worry about anybody getting behind our dwarf. And we can still attack this archer because he is considered one of our front threat hexes. So we protect ourselves and we're managing to stop this ranged attacker. So we're going to go ahead and attack him. Now the dwarf, when we look over his chart, we see that he gets 4 combat dice. If we look at an elven archer, we see that he has 2 combat dice, or 3 if he's shooting, so he only gets 2 combat dice, and he only has an armor of 1. So he gets to roll 2 dice, we get to roll 4 dice, and we get to see if we're going to smash the skeleton. So we, as the hero, we need to discard any dice that don't beat the armor of 1, so that's pretty easy. So we have 2 6s, a 3, and a 2, which is 4 hits, versus 2 hits that don't block. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 hits. We see that 4 hits means that this model is completely destroyed, putting it back in the Overlord's backup supply. So the dwarf has finished their move. It is now time for the barbarian to figure out what they want to do. Unfortunately, our barbarian player only has a movement of 7, which means he does not have access to any of the bad guys, so he's just going to position himself in a way that protects his fellow party members and make sure that the Overlord player can't sneak up on him and attack him from behind. So we're going to move our movement of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to stick our back to the wall and make sure nobody can sneak up behind us to get any free extra bonuses, and makes it much easier to attack us, especially since we only have 2 armor. Although we do have 5 combat dice, so we don't need to worry about that disappearing anytime soon. We still don't want to make it any easier on the Overlord player. So all of our heroes have activated. That's the end of our hero activation. It's now time for the Overlord player to go. Now remember, our Overlord player can play 1 card, and we also have 3 actions as the Overlord player. Plus we have these cards that we can play. Now there's a couple different things we can do. We can do the double commands, which would give us 6 activations, which might actually be a decent idea at this point because it allows us to move 3 guys, possibly 4 guys, and also bring these last 2 guys in on some of these bone piles. So I think that's actually what we're going to do. So we're going to take the double command action card, which says that the Overlord gets to do twice as many command actions. So 3 times 2 does 6. We're going to discard that card, and we now know that we have 6 actions on this turn. So now we need to figure out what we're going to do with those 6 actions. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to move this archer up 4 spaces. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces right there. That's our first activation. We have 5 activations left. We're then going to have this skeleton go 1, 2, 3, 4, moving into the threat of the barbarian. And now that skeleton gets to go ahead and attack. Now skeleton warriors get a movement of 4, and they also have 2 combat dice. So we get to roll 2 combat dice as a skeleton. The barbarian gets to roll 5 combat dice. Remember, he has an armor of 2. So we have 5 dice for the good guys, 2 dice for the bad guys. The bad guys are going to roll their dice. We're going to get a 2 and a 1. So we don't even need to roll for the barbarian because neither one of these dice are going to pass his armor, so we don't even need to worry about it. Now for our third activation, we're going to activate the skeleton, move into the threat of the barbarian there, and now we're going to start seeing how the combat modifiers can add up and make things easier either for the good guys or for the bad guys. So the first thing we need to do as the skeleton player, we see that we get 2 combat dice, which is pretty standard. And then the barbarian player gets 5 combat dice. Now since he is outnumbered, we don't have anybody in our rear threat hex, so we're okay there. But since we're outnumbered, we're going to lose 1 of our combat dice, and now we get to roll for the combat. Skeleton gets to attack, and we're going to roll a 5 and a 1. The 1 is going to be discarded because it's too feeble. Then the barbarian gets to roll 4 dice. We're going to line these dice up and see if we happen to get any defenses and manage to block the attacks of the skeleton. So we see that the 6 blocks the 5, and we don't need to worry about any of these others. Remember, the defender can never hurt the attacker when they're defending. So this 5 is not going to be enough to hurt the barbarian, so that's going to be the end of the third action for the Overlord player. The fourth action for Overlord player is we're going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, keeping our back away, because remember, that's part of the tactics. We don't want to make it any easier on our enemy. So the skeleton has moved right here, and actually, just to show you part of the tactics for the game, I'm actually going to do something a little bit differently. Since this skeleton actually starts right here, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to attack the barbarian again. So we get 2 combat dice as a skeleton, and the barbarian player gets their 5 combat dice. We're going to subtract 1 because we're outnumbered. Now these skeletons don't have the mob ability, which is what zombies have. So if all 3 of these were zombies, the barbarian would definitely be in a lot of trouble. So we're only going to lose 1 dice because we are outnumbered. So the skeleton player rolls 2 dice. We're going to get a 4 and a 3, a little bit better. Barbarian's going to roll, and they're going to get a 5, a 4, a 3, and a 1. So the 5 stops to 4, the 4 stops to 3, and we know that skeleton did not manage to do any damage to the barbarian at all. That is our 4th activation. We have 2 activations left. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert this bone pile into an archer. And then we're going to convert this other bone pile into a skeleton, which is going to help hopefully slow down these heroes who are trying to come up from the other side to assist their friends, take out these doors, and possibly find the exit of the dungeon. So we moved 4 of our guys. We've activated 2 bone piles. That is a total of 6 actions, which is a very good use of our double commands card. That is the end of the Overlord player's turn. The only thing left for the Overlord to do is to draw another card. We're going to get an extra command. And then the wizard player gets to rotate all their spells that they cast 90 degrees. And since they only cast 2 minor spells, that means both those spells are refreshed so they can be cast on the new turn. It's now the end of the very first round. We now get to move to the second round of the game. So the heroes are going to decide they're going to start their activation by activating the dwarf. And the dwarf gets to remember he has a movement of 6. We can see that on his movement chart right here. We're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to end our movement right, trying to figure out the best way to do that so we're not a pincushion for the skeleton with the bow and arrow. This actually be a good move right there. We're going to end our movement right here, which is going to be behind the skeleton. We're going to attack the skeleton. So the dwarf player has 4 combat dice, so we get to roll 4 combat dice. The skeleton gets to roll 2 combat dice, but since we're attacking from behind, he's going to suffer a penalty. So we'd actually would take -1 die. Now remember, the minimum values means that you can never roll less than 2 dice. So instead of taking away 1 die, his armor is going to go down 1 point. So basically for this combat, this specific combat, the skeleton is now at 2 combat dice and 1 armor. So we're going to attack. We're going to roll 4 dice, and none of them are 1. So all of our hits potentially can get through as long as the skeleton doesn't roll too high. So the skeleton is going to roll a 5 and a 3. We're going to compare the 6 beats the 5. The 3 and the 3 are a push, and then we got a 2 and a 2, which since his armor is down by 1, we're going to get hits on those. We're going to get a total of 3 hits. We look at the chart and see that 3 hits does mean that that model has been destroyed. He's going to go back in the supply for the necromancer. That's going to be the end of the dwarf's turn. We now need to figure out which hero we want to go next. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and decide that we're going to attack with the barbarian. Now the barbarian is still outnumbered, so instead of getting 5 dice, he's only going to get 4 dice. He needs to decide exactly which skeleton he wants to attack, and he's going to decide that he wants to attack this skeleton right there. So it's still within his front threat hex. We still get 4 dice. That skeleton still gets 2 dice. We're going to roll for the attack, and the skeleton is going to roll for defense, and it's going to get a 5 and a 1. Now remember, this skeleton is back up to 2 armor because we're not attacking it from behind and we're not outnumbering it. If I would have positioned the dwarf a little bit smarter, I could have actually avoided that, but I thought about that a little bit too late. But it doesn't matter in this case because 6 beats a 5, 6 beats a 1, we get a total of 4 hits. This skeleton has been obliterated, does not turn into a bone pile. That's the end of the barbarian's turn. Now we get to go to the elf and the wizard. Again, between all these actions, we need to make sure we're laying the necromancer. Get an opportunity to interrupt in case they have interrupt cards, but that isn't the case in this example, so we don't need to worry about it. So now we need to figure out if we want the elf or the wizard to go next. So we're going to decide that we're going to have the elf go next, and we need to remember how long his long-range attack is, so we need to figure out from there and figure out exactly how we want to position him to be most efficient. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3. We're going to stop right there, which still leaves us in perfect range for this skeleton archer over here. So we get to roll 4 dice because that's what our range combat is. That skeleton archer gets to roll 2 dice for defense, because remember it's defending, not actually doing a ranged attack. We're going to roll 4 dice. He gets to roll 2 dice, and then we need to figure out what his armor is, which is 1. So all of our dice get past its armor. So we line up our dice, and we're going to see that we get 3 hits. The skeleton is destroyed, does not turn into a bone pile, don't need to worry about it. And then finally the wizard gets to go. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to stop our move right there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to cast Flame Bolt again, which we're going to power up with a crystal. That gives us 3 dice to roll versus a skeleton who gets 2 dice only. We're going to roll a 5, a 5, and a 2. So the 2 is not enough to beat its armor. Hopefully we're going to destroy it. Well, it looks like we're not. He's going to get a 5 and a 5 versus a 6 and a 6. No damage at all to that skeleton. No effect at all. We still have 1 minor spell we can cast. We're going to decide that we're going to cast Crystallize, and hopefully we'll roll well. We'll get a 6, which is a good roll, enough to give us a level 3 energy crystal, which we can use to power up spells or use to refresh spells, whatever we want to do. It's actually a pretty good crystal. This crystal is spent. We'll put it off to the side because it's not available to us at this time. That's the end of the hero's turn. It's now time for the necromancer player to go and figure out exactly what actions they want to go. Remember, we have our cards we get to use, and we also have 3 actions in which to resolve. The first thing we're going to do as a necromancer player with our first actions, we're going to activate this skeleton who's going to shoot at the back of the dwarf. Because we are shooting at his back, we did manage to get behind him. We actually positioned pretty darn smart there, so it was actually pretty good. So we are going to get 3 dice because we're doing a ranged attack. We can check the chart there if we ever forget. So 3 dice for our skeleton archer. The dwarf gets 4 combat dice, but since we're attacking him from behind, he's going to lose 1 die. So it's 3 dice versus 3 dice. We're going to roll for the skeleton, roll for the dwarf, and we're going to get a 4, a 2, and a 1. The skeleton's going to get a 5, and a 4. Now the skeleton does have an armor of 4, so this is going to be discarded. So we compare the 5 and the 5 versus these. So we get 2 hits. Now remember, heroes can never take more than 1 wound. So we're going to take 1 wound on the dwarf. We're going to cover up 1 of the silvers. We're not injured yet because we still have silver showing, so we don't have to worry about it. So that's our first action as the Overlord player. We still have 2 actions left to do. Next action is we're going to move this skeleton 1 step sideways, and he's going to attack the wizard. Now remember, we have 2 combat dice. So we got our 2 combat dice. The wizard gets his 2 combat dice, and we're going to see if we can avoid getting hit and taking any damage. So we're going to roll a 6 and a 6. Wow, dice are on fire for the Overlord today. And we're going to roll a 6 and a 1. That's going to be 2 hits. Remember, we can never get more than 1 hit versus a hero at a time. So that's going to be 1 point of damage. The wizard is now injured. He's now -1 to all his rolls. And if we take 4 more points of damage, we're going to be defeated, and the heroes are actually going to lose. That's the second activation for the Overlord player. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to play the 1 extra command card. We're going to go ahead and bring this skeleton bone pile back to life. It's going to become an archer. And then our final action is to take this skeleton right here, and we're going to attack the barbarian. Actually, take that back. I got a better idea. We're going to turn this bone pile into another skeleton warrior, because remember, we're trying to slow down the bad guys, prevent them from getting out before that timer runs out, allowing them to win the game. That is 4 activations for our Overlord player. We get to draw another card. Our heroes get to refresh any spells that they cast by rotating them 90 degrees. That's the end of the second round. It's now time to start the third turn. For the hero activation, the heroes are going to activate the ranger first, who's going to move 1, 2, 3. And I think we're going to stop right there, making sure we're keeping line of sight and making sure we're keeping range. Looks like we still have line of sight. We don't have to worry about the corner block, and we still shoot that skeleton. We get to roll 4 dice. That skeleton gets to roll 2 dice. We're going to get a 3 and a 1. Remember, 1s don't bypass its armor because that skeleton does have an armor of 2. So we're going to roll a 6 and a 3 versus a 3 and a 1. That's going to be 2 hits. That means that skeleton is going to be turned into a pile of bones. Not quite obliterated. It can be resurrected by the necromancer player. That's the end of the ranger's turn. It's now the wizard's turn. He's going to activate. He's going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And he has turned right at that location right there. And then he's going to go ahead and cast Flame Bolt. Now, luckily, Flame Bolt is in long range. We can check our range if we really want to, but we can pretty much eyeball that and see that the skeleton archer is definitely in range. We're going to power it with one of our level 1 crystals, which means we're going to get a total of 3 dice to roll. Versus that skeleton archer who only gets 2 dice in the defense. We're going to roll our 3 dice, and they get their defense die. They're going to roll a 2 and a 2. We're going to get a 5, a 5, and a 2. Their armor is only 1, so that means we're going to get 3 hits because we beat both the die. 3 hits means that is destroyed. It's not going to get to turn into a bone pile. That's going to use up our Flame Bolt. We're then going to cast our Crystallize, and hopefully we'll roll high enough to get a good crystal. We're going to roll a 4, which is going to give us a level 2 crystal, so we now have a level 1, 2, and 3 crystal. We're actually doing pretty darn decent. Those crystals can be used to power up a lot of spells, especially if we have to worry about more powerful monsters behind this door, because right now we have no idea what is behind that door. Now, I could have done something different. I could have done the break ward to get that treasure chest, but I thought it was better to take out that ranger before he takes out my dwarf. So now that both these heroes have activated, it's time for these 2 heroes to figure out what they're going to do. This hero is going to activate, and he gets a movement of 6. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's going to face the opponent. He gets to roll 4 combat dice first to that skeleton, and we're going to get a pretty darn good roll. That skeleton gets to roll 2 combat dice. We're going to beat that. We're going to beat that. That beats. This is ignored. We're going to get a total of 3 hits. So this skeleton is going to be completely destroyed. Doesn't get to turn into a bone pile. And then this hero, unfortunately, cannot move because we can't move from a threat hex to a threat hex. So we're pretty much blocked in. So the only thing left to do is to go ahead and attack and see if we obliterate that skeleton. No penalties on the rolls. We're going to get all 5 of our dice. He gets 2 of his dice. And, well, I think I may have just made a mistake there. We're going to get a 4 doesn't beat, 4 doesn't beat, 3 equals 1 hit, no effect. That skeleton managed to take the full weight of the barbarian's rage without anything happening to him. That's the end of the hero turn. It's now time for the necromancer player to go. The first thing we're going to do as a necromancer player is we're going to take a little bit of a gamble, and hopefully this gamble will pay off for us. We're going to reanimate that bone pile and make it pop up right here. Now, since it's popping up in the barbarian's threat hex, he does get a free attack. Hopefully it'll live and survive this attack. We're going to get a 5, a 4. Well, all these don't beat his armor, so we have a 5 and a 4. 5 and a 4, no damage versus that skeleton, so it looks like our gamble did pay off. So now for our second action, this skeleton is going to attack the barbarian. And now since we're outnumbering him, he is going to lose 1 die. We're going to roll 4 dice for the barbarian on the defense, and the skeleton gets 2 dice on the attack. We're going to get a 5 and a 2, which is not going to be enough to get past his defense, so the barbarian is going to survive that. That is 2 of our actions as a necromancer player. Our third action is to go 1, 2, 3, 4 facing this way, and we're going to go ahead and shoot at the elf. So our ranged attack for a skeleton is we get 3 dice to roll. That elf gets to roll his defense, so he's going to get 3 combat dice in defense, so it's going to be a 3 versus a 3. We'll roll our dice as the attacker. We don't need to worry about it because none of that are going to beat his armor. That's going to be our third activation. We're now going to spend this card right here, which is going to give us 2 extra activations. Our first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this bone pile right here into an archer. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this bone pile right here into a skeleton warrior. That's all of our extra activations. We're going to refresh our cards for our heroes. The necromancer player gets to draw another card, and that's the end of that round. It's now time to move on to the 4th round. So the first thing we're going to do as the heroes is we're not liking the fact that our poor barbarian is out there being hacked on by all these skeletons and being outnumbered. Now, while he hasn't been hurt yet, that isn't going to be remaining true for very long unless we start taking out some of our enemies. So Dwarf is going to turn around and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and try to help their friend. Now we're attacking the skeleton from behind. So the skeleton's going to go from a 2-2 to a 2-1. We get to roll 4 combat dice versus the skeleton. And we're going to get 2 2s for the skeleton. Now, since his defense is now down to 1, this is going to disappear. And we're going to see that we are actually going to barely manage to get 3 hits. 3 hits is enough to destroy that skeleton. He is going to be removed from the board. Now the heroes are getting ready to make their next action when the Overlord announces that they have an interrupt card. We are actually going to play that interrupt card right now. And then we're going to use it to try to take advantage of the weakened state of the wizard, the fact that he does not have the ability to defend himself, and the fact that he is already injured. So we're going to roll 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to turn, face the wizard who is technically on this square right here. We easily have line of sight. We get to roll 3 dice. The wizard in defense only gets to roll 2 dice, and we're going to see if we manage to hurt him. We managed to get past his armor. We definitely managed to get a hit in. That technically would have been 3 hits. Remember, a hero can't take more than 1 hit from an action. So that's going to be a second wound for our hero, making things very, very tough for our heroes, meaning they need to start protecting the wizard, because if the wizard falls, the heroes have lost. So it's now back to our hero's turn since we have done our 1 interrupt action. We're going to have the barbarian go. He is going to attack that skeleton. There's going to be no penalties at all. Roll 5 dice versus their 2 dice. These 2 dice go away. And it looks like we're going to get a little bit better luck. Not quite great luck. But we're definitely going to get 2 hits in, which will turn this skeleton back into a bone pile, which frees up our barbarian a little bit. And now we're going to have this character go. He's going to take out that skeleton before he dismantles our wizard. So we as the heroes, we get 4 combat dice in range for the ranger. The skeleton gets 2 dice in defense. And remember, all 1s are ignored. We're going to end up getting only 1 hit, which is not going to have any effect versus a skeleton. And we're going to see that the Overlord dice seem to be loaded, but we're not going to make any comments on that. The only thing left for our heroes to do is to activate the wizard, and we're going to cast another one of our flame bolts. We're actually going to power it up with our level 2 crystal, which is going to give us 2 extra dice. So we're going to get a total of 4 dice, hoping to definitely destroy this skeleton archer who seems to have the magical dice that protect him from falling down. We're going to roll 4 dice. That skeleton gets to roll 2 dice. And we are easily going to obliterate that skeleton, doing what wizards do best by blowing things into little tiny bits. This crystal has been used up, unfortunately, but it was definitely worth it. We now have 1 minor spell left to do, and we could cast Crystallize, but instead we're actually going to do another minor. We're going to cast Break Ward to open up this treasure chest, which only has a 1 defense versus magic. And we're going to see, hopefully, that's going to be something good inside there, and we're going to find 2 very nice rewards. Well, the first thing we're going to find in the treasure chest is a healing potion, which we are definitely going to be using very, very quickly. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to find the spider silk armor. Now, unfortunately, since the wizard found the spider silk armor, since he's the one to open the chest, he can't actually give it to the elven ranger, so the elven ranger can't use this item this adventure, but at least we'll have it into the next adventure, which will be a nice bonus. So we're simply going to take this healing potion. We're going to use that healing potion immediately. That's going to remove one wound from us, making us a little bit further from death, making things a little more difficult for the Overlord player. All of our adventurers have gone. That is the end of the adventurer's turn. It's now time for the Overlord player to activate all their monsters. Now remember, the Overlord player gets 3 actions, plus they can play 1 card if they want to. So we are going to decide that we're going to move 1, 2, 3 right next to the Elven Ranger, and we're going to attack the Elven Ranger. Now we get 2 combat dice, and since we're adjacent to the Elven Ranger, he only gets 3 combat dice to defend himself. So we're going to roll our 2 attack dice. We're going to get a 5 and a 2. The 2 does not bypass his armor. The Elven Ranger gets to roll his dice, and we're going to get a 5, a 4, and a 1. That's enough to defend us. We don't take any damage from that. That is our first activation. The next activation is this this skeleton archer is going to attack the barbarian. So we get 3 dice for our ranged attack. We get a 4 and 2 1s. The 4 is the only thing that's going to bypass his armor. Then we get to roll 5 dice on defense, and definitely not going to do any damage. So that's our second activation. And then for our final activation, we could try to pop this up to again slow down the barbarian. But he'll probably smash that down because I don't see his luck running bad for that long. Or the other option is we can activate this and bring him back into life as a skeleton archer, which allows us to start plinking against our opponents. And I think that's actually what we're going to do. So we're going to take that, turn that back into a skeleton archer. That is all 3 of our actions. We're not going to decide that we're going to actually use this card right here. We're going to save it for another turn. That's going to end the necromancer's turn. We're simply going to refresh our minor spells, draw another card, and that's going to be the end of the round. We're going to start the next round with our heroes and need to figure out exactly what they want to do. For the heroes activation, they're decided that we're actually going to activate the wizard first, and we're going to cast a major spell, which means we're going to flip it 100 degrees, and we're going to cast burn. Now burn allows us to roll 4 dice. We're not going to power up with any crystals because again we have no idea what's behind this door, and we don't want to burn all of our resources in case there's a big giant monster like possibly a troll or anything else behind that door. So we're trying to save that as our big final cannon at the end of the adventure. So we get to roll 4 dice. That skeleton, he only gets to roll 2 combat dice. And we're going to roll our dice. We're going to get a 6, a 4, a 4, and a 3, which hopefully should be enough to blow that skeleton to smithereens, hopefully. We're going to get a 5 and a 5, which means we're going to get 1 hit, no hit, and 2 other hits for a total of 3 hits, which is enough to blow that skeleton into little itty-bitty splinters, enough that he's not going to leave a bone pile behind. That's the end of the wizard's turn. It's now time for the rest of our heroes to activate. This elven archer is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, putting him in range of the skeleton. He's going to roll 4 dice, and that's not going to bypass its armor. It gets to roll 2 dice, and we are going to get 1 hit, which is not going to be effective versus that skeleton archer. The barbarian is going to move, or actually the dwarf's going to move. He gets a movement of 6. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we'll put our back to the wall so we don't have to worry about a threat facing. The barbarian is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Again, keeping his back to the wall so he doesn't have to worry about the threat facing versus that archer getting extra free hits from behind. So that's all the moves for all of our heroes. That ends the hero's turn. It's now back to the necromancer's turn. The first thing the necromancer player is going to do is they're going to activate the skeleton, move 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they're going to go ahead and shoot at the barbarian. Now we get 3 dice at the range. The barbarian player gets 5 dice for his defense. We're going to roll the dice. Barbarian gets to roll his dice, and the 2 is not enough to get past his armor, so that's going to be ignored. And we can see that the other dice aren't going to be enough to do any damage. So that's our first activation. Second activation is going to move 1, 2, 3. Actually, we'll move 4 right there. We'll want to get close enough. We're going to roll 3 dice versus the elven archer, and he gets to roll his defense dice of 3 dice. We're going to get a 6, a 5, and a 2. We're going to get a 6, a 5, and a 3, which is just barely enough to do a point of damage to the Elven Ranger. So now he actually has a wound. And we have 1 activation left as the Overlord player. We're going to go ahead and take this bone pile right here, and we're going to turn it into a skeleton warrior. That's all 3 of our actions. We could play a card if we want to, but we're actually saving these cards for what's behind that door. That's the end of Overlord player's turn. We're going to draw another card. The heroes are going to refresh their spells 90 degrees, so that means burn is not going to be usable this turn. That's the end of this round. It's now time for the next round. Our heroes are starting to feel a little bit of time pressure, starting to see that the Overlord's deck is starting to run very, very low, and the Overlord is starting to stack up a whole bunch of cards for possible later plays, so we're starting to feel a little bit of pressure. So we're going to decide that we're going to activate the Barbarian with his movement of 7, go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're going to try to bash down this door. Now remember, this door has a certain amount of defense and dice based on pre-decided options based on the certain adventure that we happen to be facing. In this specific case, this door has 3 armor and gets to roll 3 dice on the defense. So our Barbarian player gets to roll 5 dice. And remember, all we need is just 1 hit to knock down the door. The door is going to roll its defense dice. We're going to get a 6, a 5, and a 4. The Barbarian player gets to ignore any 3s because it does have 3 defense. So we're going to roll a 5, a 4, and a 4, meaning that we rolled 3 dice that were not effective enough to take down the door, so that door is going to stand. That's the end of the Barbarian's turn. The Wizard's going to get out of the way, and then the Dwarf is going to take their action, going 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to try to bash down the door. Now the Dwarf only gets 4 combat dice because he has 4 combat dice versus the same 3 combat dice of the door. We're going to roll our dice, and we're realizing the dice just are not in our favor today. We have 1 die. We need to hope that none of these are a 5 or higher, and they're definitely going to be too high. That door is not going to fall down. I think you've seen enough gameplay to figure out if Dungeon Saga is going to be the kind of game for your players and your gaming group. I hope you enjoyed this sample gameplay video showing some gameplay from Dungeon Saga itself. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them in the YouTube comments down below. I'll be sure to answer them to the best of my abilities. If you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and also if you want to help support the channel, you can also support me on Patreon now. Go to patreon.com, off the shelf board game reviews, and go ahead and click that support button if you want to help bring more games, more videos, more tutorials, and more stuff from the gaming hobby. And hope you enjoy this video series. Thanks for watching.